how's your chi? Is your energy in need of adjustment, or are you vibrating on the wrong frequency? Can some crystals or time in a sweat lodge or maybe a yoga class help you clear out all that negative energy? Or is all that stuff bogus? And if it doesn't really work, is it just silly, or could it actually be dangerous? We're going to be talking about all of that and more on today's episode of Theology on Air. Well, welcome back to Theology on Air. As you know, Theology on Air is an offshoot of Theology on Tap, which is a ministry to young adults in the Houston area where we drink really delicious beer and we talk about really interesting things around faith and culture, all kinds of juicy stuff. And if you ever want to come to one of our events, or maybe even just find where all of our videos are online or any of that, you can find everything you need to know at houstontot.com. And we are a nonprofit now, and we are fundraising to be even bigger and better. And so if you're interested in giving to the cause, you can go to houstontot.com/give and help us out on that front too. But this is Theology on Air. This is the podcast. We get to dive in deep to some of our own pet ideas and deeper into the subjects that we don't get to do at our live events. So I'm Sarah Stone. I'm the executive director for Theology on Tap, joined by Evan McClanahan. He's our senior pastor of First Lutheran here in Midtown and also on the leadership team for TOT. And we're joined today by a very special guest I hunted down. Her name is Amber Aldrich. Amber spent nearly 15 years deep diving into New Age and occult practices before Christ saved her. She's now passionate about discussing the deceptive practices she was involved in and God's grace and goodness to continue rescuing people out of the New Age. She lives in Phoenix, Arizona, and is recently engaged. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's exciting.
It
Glad
is
to have you today. So as you know, this is part of a series that we're doing on fringe groups and fringe beliefs. This is episode 4. We're going to be talking about, and I'm putting this in quotes if you're not watching, healing. So a lot of people talk about healing. Sometimes they're talking about the healing that you do, maybe if you're in therapy or if you've experienced trauma and that kind of thing, but it quickly bleeds into what we would call New Age practices. I was telling some of our other guests, I don't like the term New Age because it sounds like something that like my parents warned me about years ago. It sounds like an old thing, like hippies were into New Age stuff. Like we don't do that today. This is just about self-work, and but it's the same stuff. It's the same New Age beliefs, just packaged differently. And we're going to talk about a few different areas of that today. We're going to cover Reiki healing or just energy healing, maybe a little bit about crystals, sweat lodges, and then yoga. Y'all, I know you're going to come for me on this yoga thing, but we're going there. So what we're going to do today is hear Amber's story and explore some of the areas that she was involved in. And we're just going to ask the questions like, is this biblical? Is this good? What's the harm? All of that. So I figured the best way to do this is just to have you start telling us a little bit of your own story. Maybe give us some background. How did you grow up? What was it that led you into the first bits of what would become really a 15-year journey into the New Age?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on too. I'm excited for this conversation. I was raised in what I would consider a cult. And so that was, it was Bible based, but not true to the gospel. And so I was raised with what I lovingly refer to as a crappy version of the gospel.
Okay.
And so it was like, I knew about Christ and I knew that he had died for our sins, but then a lot of other stuff was really, misrepresented. And so that was under the teachings of a man named William Branham. And you'll find
yeah. I thought about doing Branhamism for this series, but I wasn't sure it was like sort of well-known or popular enough that's so interesting. Okay,
I really
know that.
don't think it is well known. And it was really interesting because when I was on Cultish, when I was talking to Jeremiah about doing an episode originally, I ended up finding out that they had done like an 8-part series, and I had never met anybody outside of that world that knew of it. Like I'll say this and people are like, well, who? And then they want to know, like I'm making it up or something. Like it's just a fun story I've decided would make me more interesting.
Oh man, we could climb all into that. We won't, but there was all kinds of weird racist stuff and like a connection to KKK. It's fascinating stuff. Anyway, so
yeah, so future episode. And
Yeah.
I was so young, so I don't know much about it, but
Yeah.
I know the impact. So anyhow, raised like that, and then kind of went into a vacuum of no religion. When my parents pulled out of that, it was just kind of nothingness. And then as a preteen, started going to just a non-denominational church over on the west side in Arizona, in Glendale, with a neighbor, and did that for a handful of years until I decided I was too cool for that or whatever. And,
Mhm.
wanted to hang out with my friends in high school. And so yeah, meandered away from it, and then moved to Seattle and just completely went secular, just
Mhm.
gave up any ideas of God or religion, and just kind of lived in a secular world, but not anything occult or new age or anything like that. Wasn't really
Yeah.
pursuing anything spiritual.
Yeah.
And so I was mostly living a secular life. And then I went through a divorce in my early
Mm.
30s. And that, leading up to that, a little bit in simple things like Oprah Book Club books and things like Wayne Dyer and Eckhart Tolle and some of these like
Mhm.
just soft entry
Mhm.
into the idea around prosperity and all oneness. And
Maybe a little law of attraction thrown in there for good measure.
sure, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely, yeah, The Secret, things of that
Yeah.
nature. Pretty low key, but really accessible, and they're becoming more,
Yep.
just I feel like there's just more knowledge of them.
Mhm.
So was starting to get into things like that. And then it was maybe a year after my divorce that I ended up going to take a Reiki healing training, they call it an attunement. And so that was my foray into energy healing.
Okay.
And from there, I really dove. I went through the different levels of the Reiki training. I started with some other practitioners, learning even more fringe uh, healing modalities
Let
that
me let me
were
pause you for a second because I want
sure.
the whole process of the Reiki, like you becoming a person, I don't know, massage therapist or whatever it's called. But what tell us what Reiki is, and are there other kinds of energy healing outside of Reiki, or like that's not the umbrella of it, right? Okay, so maybe just walk us through like what is Reiki? Reiki for our listeners are like, I've never heard of that. What language are they speaking?
Sure.
Um, tell us what it is, how it's supposed to work. Give us the whole scoop on that.
Sure. Well, like you said in the intro, you said something about your chi. And
Yeah.
so Ki of Reiki is that same word.
Oh, snap. I never
I
made
believe
that
it's in
connection.
Japanese. So your energy, that's what that word means. And so
Mhm.
so this idea is that the Reiki practitioner is accessing um what we would call source energy. And,
Okay.
because I can't call it God. And so
Oh, okay.
the energy from the source of the universe, source energy, and being able to move your energy. So this gets into chakras, clearing chakra
Mhm.
in people. So different blockages and things like that, getting energy moving, releasing things for people.
So is the
And
underlying idea that we have a certain amount of energy in us, but that there's also energy out in the world, in the universe, and it's about how we're the give and take? Like, how is your energy off? How might one, I mean, in their way of thinking, I realize you don't believe this anymore, but
sure. So you could have the idea would be that you could have blockages of energy that might be from physical trauma or emotional trauma or spiritual trauma. And so then, yeah, you have this practitioner come in and work on you. So, and the idea and this, you'll see this throughout. This is a theme in shamanic practices also. This idea of like the hollow bone or the hollow straw, where they'll
Hmm.
say, like I, as the practitioner, would say, I'm not doing anything
Mhm.
to quote unquote heal you, but I am this hollow vessel for the energy to flow through as a conduit into you.
Okay.
And so, and the other analogy that people would use a lot is like a radio, like for the attunements, for being attuned to Reiki or different energy healing things, would be that everybody's capable of doing this. It's just that you either have had your radio dial tuned to this channel or you haven't.
Okay, interesting.
So that's kind of those are the language you hear a lot in that world around it. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
No, this is all helpful. And then how to, like, practically speaking, it looks like, I will tell you, long before I knew this was a mess, this was over a decade ago, I had a friend that was going to be getting trained, and she called it Reiki massage. That was a misnomer. I was excited. She was like, "Can I practice on you for free?" I was like, "Yes, I would love to get a free massage." And then she's like, "Now just lay on your sofa. I'm actually not going to touch you." And for like the next 20 minutes, I lay there with my eyes closed with her, I guess, hovering her hands over me, not touching me. I'm like, this is the worst massage I've ever had. You know, all my knots are still there. So is that it? You're sort of running your hands in the field around people. Like, how does it actually work?
Yeah.
I mean,
so Reiki, yes, Reiki, technically you don't touch the person. So yes, your hands hover over them, and then are moving from position to position. I had my teacher when I went through my attunement process, my teacher felt that we as humans were so deprived of touch that we should absolutely touch the people. The idea, I think, behind that is if you touch somebody, they may associate that experience with you as the human touching them versus feeling the energy flowing and being like, oh, this was clearly source energy coming to me.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, it makes it more
interesting.
Special.
Okay. So you were becoming an expert, a practitioner. What all did that involve? Like, how was it, like lessons? Did you go to classes? Do you have a certificate? Like, what does that look like?
I did have certificates. I threw them all away. There's a lot of things that went in the dumpster in the last couple of years.
That's another thing New Agers all have in common. They burn things, throw them away, like they don't want them around anymore.
Well,
I get it.
It's like the magician in Acts, right? You know, they collect all the magic books, and they're like 50,000 shekels worth or something, like extremely valuable. So I'm sure those certificates cost you a lot of money, right? So it was the equivalent
of thousands of dollars.
Oh,
tens
my
of thousands.
gosh.
Wow. So it is like
not just for, I mean, the Reiki itself was less than that, but Reiki itself used to be considerably more than that. And for example, my teacher, when she was a Reiki master, you know, decades ago, she said that she had people, you know, come to visit from Japan, and like these men bowed to her because of her status as a Reiki. Like it was such a big deal, and it was so uncommon, and it was so expensive. But now it's like people will attune you for free. Nowadays,
you for free. Please, I would like no one to attune me, please.
Yes.
Can I just ask, is just out of total ignorance of all of this, but like, are chakras real? I mean, people talk about them like it's very much, it's like, I don't know, it's where your central nervous system comes together. I don't know, but do you think they're real at all, or is it just totally made up, or what?
I don't have a final decision on this. I feel like this falls under like the mysteries of the Lord. Like if God put energy centers inside us that operate in a specific way inside our body. I mean, there's all sorts of things about the workings of my body that I don't understand in the least. And he's just beyond creative and comes up with things that I would never think of. So it's possible, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know. And I wouldn't ascribe to them in the way that I have, and I wouldn't define them in the way that I have. I don't ever think about my chakras in this present day in life. I don't think about what color they are, or perhaps if they're blocked or anything like that.
Yeah.
Is it a physical thing?
They say it's like wheels, right? It's like a little metaphysical
wheel
of energy.
Okay.
And I will say, I mentioned this to you last time, but not like on the recording. There's a podcast I listen to. It's the Jordan Harbinger Show. It is not Christian. They actually probably think we're sort of wacky, but they do a Skeptical Sunday, and they've been talking about various things like acupuncture and crystals and whatever. And they will give a description of what chakras are ostensibly or supposed to be, and then say like, no one in the history of MRIs and surgeries or anything has ever actually physically been able to see this. Anyway, I mean, we all three believe in some stuff that you can't see, so that's not enough to say it doesn't exist. But I'm gonna take the position of they're not real.
Okay.
but we can spar about that if you want. But okay, so it looks like you going through these classes and getting better and better, and then doing this energy healing. Who was coming to you? Did you have like a storefront? Like what was that like?
No, I ended up, and so just really quickly for the classes, they were really brief. They're generally like a weekend long for each level, and there's generally 3 levels. So you generally do 1, 2, and then I can't remember if it's 3 and then master level or 3 is master level. For Reiki at least. And then there's other energy healing, like I said, that are different modalities that are not under the umbrella of Reiki, but they'll use a lot of similar terms. I was trained in a couple different of those by different teachers. And those will be
what are
like,
some names that, what are some
sure,
terms that people might know?
I studied theta healing was one.
That sounds like Scientology. Oh, that's Thetan. That's different. Never mind.
Yeah. And so then, and then the other one was by a woman who's out of Tucson, Arizona. And it's like the quick pulse and advanced pulse. I'm going to be shocked if anyone's ever heard of them. They're really fringe. And so, but like theta, for example, you're almost remote viewing when you're working on somebody
else. What does that mean?
So, like you're going through a process mentally where you're imagining yourself going up and then down into their body and walking around.
Oh, I saw a movie called The Cell where Jennifer Lopez did that. I'm being totally silly, but wow. Okay. Interesting.
So some of it's real nutty. And I didn't actually ever have my own storefront or anything like that. I wanted to, and I feel like God, looking back at it now, I feel like God just protected me because I was so close. Like I had everything dialed in and ready to open up with a woman who had a massage business, and I was going to be in her same space offering all of these things. And then my best friend since high school died unexpectedly, and I just kind of tailspun. And so I backed off it, and then I ended up moving out of the area, and it just never worked out. And then I started building back up again to do it again, and then something else happened and just stopped it. So I just feel like it was God's grace that he just kept me from, because I see how much we'll get to my yoga, but I see how much sadness I have at how many people as a yoga teacher that I was up in front of that I misled through that I'm so grateful that I didn't also have like books full of people that I was practicing these things on, though I did have, some one-off clients and people who were other practitioners that we would do exchanges and things like that. So it definitely, I did practice it, and I did it on myself every single day.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask you, if you both questions, being on the receiving end of it, did you feel like it, quote, worked? Did it feel different? And then, as a practitioner, but now looking back through the lens of true Christianity, do you think something spiritual or energy or whatever you want to call it was actually happening in those sessions?
Yeah, I did feel things, and I did ascribe healing to sessions that I had, and sessions that I gave. And also I do think that something was happening, and I just don't, what freaks me out is that I don't know I don't know what spirits and energies I was aligned with to have those results. And that is enough to give me a lot of pause about any of that. And that's why I have such a hard line about those things. And I'm like, nope, those don't.
Rightfully so.
Yes.
Now when we've had Marsha Montenegro on the show, she's talked about when she was doing astrology, she actually had a sort of a spirit guide that she tapped into and would now say was demonic. But at the time she knew there was some sort of other presence feeding her information. Would you say it was something similar to that, where you were aware that something outside of yourself was communicating with you? Or would you just think you were sort of working with the energies of the earth and space? And what was your concept of that at that time?
I would say it was both, was how I felt about it. But yeah, I didn't have one specific. I think that's more common in people who do astrology, and also
Tarot.
Yeah, that is possibly that as well, but mediums. And so I didn't feel like I had one direct, but I had specific, I don't want to say elements, but specific, like, I know I had a strong tie to tobacco, and I would use that in a prayerful way and to get information. And then also certain animals, in that world, you'd call them totem animals. And then there was just information that I would get from, I would think it was from the universe or source or whatever,
Yeah.
That, I couldn't ascribe, like, I couldn't say, oh, this is this entity giving me this information.
Sure.
It's just
Okay.
like a general input coming. So,
but you definitely did feel like healing was happening, and it was something outside of yourself using you as a vessel to give you your own or other people's healing.
Sure, but I almost even want to hesitate as you're saying it, because I know you're basically repeating back what I just said, but I'm also like, for context for people listening, the healing is like, even if one thing improved, for the time being, like, I wouldn't call it healing in the sense of like true healing comes through Christ, and and like I couldn't understand, from my limited understanding of healing before Christ, I would have called it healing. And from my understanding now, I would say that something was happening and it was an experience, and maybe even some symptoms did heal, but that overall I would not put that in the category of healing. I hope that's clear.
No, that's actually super clear. And I should have just said like perceived healing or something, because I knew what you meant. We know the human mind is incredibly powerful, and placebo effect and all that kind of stuff. I mean, even if you take the spiritual dimension completely out of it, which you can't, but if you could, the mind is capable of, quote, healing some things if you manipulate things just right and believe it. And I mean, not everything. You can't get rid of cancer, but you can calm your nerves and that kind of thing. So I'm sure there was probably a combination of things happening. But yeah, when I am asking you about how it was at the time, I mean, your perception at the time was that, quote, again, the title of the whole thing is, quote, healing. But I'm glad you're reminding our listeners that yes, true healing only comes because of God's grace and love for us. But okay, I have to ask this because, and if there are a few people that if they're listening, let me just say, I love you and you're my friend, but I have to ask this question. Some of my friends go to get Reiki, but it's supposedly Christian Reiki. And so when they, and I want you to answer this honestly, you don't have to sugarcoat it. I want them to hear from someone other than me. They will say that the practitioner is actually praying and asking the Holy Spirit to show them or lead them to like how to, I don't know, work the energy in the room or whatever. What are your thoughts on that?
I would not practice anything like that. And I would not have anyone practice anything like that on me. To me, if you're going for prayer, go see your friend or this acquaintance for prayer and sit in prayer, but under the guise of it being Reiki, like I just wouldn't, I don't know what you're opening yourself up to. And I would just turn to the word of God and turn to prayer in its purest form. Like we don't need to put bells and whistles on the way that God made it for us. And so, I would avoid it. I think people are so sinful. We want to have the things we want to have. And then we want to so we make it like, okay, we're like, oh, but this is, and we'll get into yoga. It's the Christian yoga thing and all of this. And I've played with this idea, like, can you do it? Can you do all the postures to worship music? And the answer is no.
Yeah. Don't try to Jesus-ize the new age practices. Just
Yeah. And it just comes down to like, with that, it's like, I don't go to other people's temple to worship, it's just not what I do. So
that's good.
I don't need the lineage of Reiki involved in my prayer with Christ.
Yeah. Solid stuff.
We're indwelled by the Holy Spirit. Like, what more do we need?
Amen. Okay. So continue walking through the story. So you're now a practitioner, you're doing Reiki. And then you're like, this isn't enough. I'm going to go sweat it out in a sweat lodge. Like, walk us through sort of the next part of your path.
Sure. Yeah, there's just a lot. It's never ending. That's the thing. It's you never attain enough in the new age world, because you're always seeking enlightenment. You're always seeking that next stage. And
Doreen
so
Virtue said those exact same words last week when we recorded with her. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Keep going. Sorry, that's just yeah, sounds like that's the
true. Yeah. Yeah. And that's actually, I love Doreen Virtue. And she was somebody who, hearing her testimony and being like, oh, how sad, this poor woman, she had it all together and she just like regressed back into Christianity. I wonder what went wrong with her. And then like a year or so later, I'm like consuming her content and like doing what she recommends and getting rid of all the books and throwing away everything.
How funny is that?
So, yeah.
Wait, you're saying you listened to her when you were still in the New Age movement? Gotcha. Yeah. And you felt bad for her.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But you're saying like, it's for her, it's a never, like she never got done. Like the journey's never finished.
Almost like escalate to the next thing or go to the next thing. It was always searching. It's this Gnostic kind of like, there's more knowledge out there, there's more enlightenment. And so it's this never ending hamster wheel kind of.
Yeah.
Because even when you get into a good zone and everything's working really well and you're working the law of attraction and all the things are happening and like your life is flowing and it's so beautiful. And then something happens.
Right.
And you're like, but I wasn't doing anything wrong. Okay, this has got to be karma from a past life. Okay, now I've got more work to do. Oh, I've got to clear this, and so it's just this like never ending, because you're thinking you're just like lifetime upon lifetime upon lifetime of coming here to learn and do better until you become an ascended master. Like that's just the trajectory.
It sounds exhausting.
It's terrible. It's awful. There's so much freedom in Christ for people who are out of this world. It's those friends of mine and I that sit around and talk about where we came from and where we are now, we're just so easy. It's like, it's not easy. It's simple. It's simple. Yeah. It's not easy to follow Christ, but it's simple. So
a good distinction.
Yeah. So anyhow, so I was just never ending cycle, chasing after it. And then, I had the opportunity to go, and this was my final, experience in that world, was going to the sweat lodge and doing a vision quest where I sat out for 24 hours, dry fasting. So no food, no water. We were in Joshua Tree, California. It was exceedingly hot. It was not supposed to be as warm as it was. It was 103 degrees every day we were there. By the time we got ready for the ceremony, we went into the sweat lodge at the hottest part of the day. It was the quickest sweat lodge I've ever been in. But we are like, because I had done sweat lodges before. I'd done them.
Wait, so let me back it up a little bit.
Sure.
You're doing Reiki healing, and then what happened? Like how did you even get into the shamanic world of sweat lodge, or is that connected to Reiki? Because I didn't think the two were particularly.
It depends on the practitioner. So my Reiki teacher she called herself Reiki shamanic. And so we learned shamanic practices through her. And then I had other friends who were into it. And that's the thing, like the new age world is so fascinating because everything is allowed in it. Like you can mix and match all the modalities. And even Jesus is allowed in there as long as he's friendly, peaceful, ascended teacher, master, hippie Jesus. But the Father is not allowed in there. Like God the Father is absolutely unallowed. And you bring him up and you are like out, like no one wants to talk to you. So he is not allowed, but everything else, you can mix and match. I can say, I want this Hindu God that I do these ceremonies and prayers for, and I want this Native American, practice. And I want, all of these different things. And I'm going to sprinkle a little Jesus on top, and you can have all of that and nobody cares. Like no one gets mixed up and is like, wait a minute, I thought you were just a Reiki energy healer. It's like, yeah, of course you're constantly growing. Of course you're now into shamanism and
got
it. So shamans keep showing up at like government insurrections.
Stop.
No, I mean, in all seriousness, there was just this one, and I don't know, it was in Kentucky, right? Where like, I don't know, they're mad about some law. So like, you had a shaman there, and of course.
Hey guys. Sarah here. Sorry to interrupt the podcast. I know it was awesome, but I just wanted to tell you that Theology on Tap is growing. We are now a standalone ministry, an independent nonprofit, and to grow, we need your help. We're offering more live events, more follow-up opportunities to reach the unchurched, and increased partnerships with local churches. You can help us grow by praying for us, by telling your friends or church about us, and of course, partnering with us financially. To donate, go to houstontot.com/give. Okay, enjoy the rest of the show.
QAnon shaman at J6 and all that. But I mean, if you think like 10 years ago, and there was like an angry group of citizens, and they actually wanted to go to the courthouse to make a statement or go to the legislature's house, there weren't shamans then. I mean, so I'm like, in all seriousness, saying, like, shamanism, whatever that is, I want that defined too. But like whatever it is, it's like people are invoking these things to bring about change in their governments, in their societies. I mean, they're like calling curses, and one was like a kind of pro-abortion group, I think, but it's like calling curses on lawmakers and talking things into being. So it's like there is a political, like, a connection. I think it has like what's that? It's like a tipping point, right? Where like it's such a normal practice that like it's part of political movements. But what is shamanism exactly? I think you've hinted at it, but.
And I don't know if I'm the best person to define it, but I think of it as the practices, generally speaking. I'm accustomed to shamans being in like South America, that being a South American thing,
Indigenous,
and that indigenous cultures would have. Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect way of saying it, Sarah. So then having that towns and villages would have a shaman, and they would be the person who would, give information and have spiritual advice, wisdom, healing for the village. But it can look
usually
like
mixed with a little bit of alchemy, right? Like some kind of like herbs and tree barks and potions and such in addition to,
or like a lot of, if you're into this world, I didn't get into this, praise God, this is another where he just kept me safe from it, is getting into psychedelics and like psychotropic plants. And so a lot of times you're seeing a shaman in that village to have an ayahuasca trip, or to, experience these different plant medicines. And for spiritual work. Like that's the idea, is that you're going to do spiritual work with that plant medicine. And so
I had wanted to do an episode in the series about ayahuasca, and especially the connection with like Mother Earth / Gaia / feminism, but couldn't find quite the right person. But that world is like run from that. I think people think, I have friends that are not believers in anything. They would maybe call themselves agnostic or atheist, but will go or want to go down somewhere to, the Amazon with a shaman and do ayahuasca so they can sort of, I don't know themselves better, do the self-work they need to do. But the whole time they're like smoking certain things and putting smoke in the room and praying certain prayers and chanting around you to different spirits. It is very spiritual. That's a great word for it. It's not an atheist practice.
No.
But your version of shamanism.
Well, yeah, and quickly, and this is off topic, but that whole world, and you pointed to it with the Mother Earth piece, is solely focused on the feminine. And that's part of why it makes so much sense that they don't let God the Father in. Like they don't want him there. But that's a whole side topic.
It's a fascinating one though.
Fun to delve into. Yes, absolutely. Because then you're like, oh, the feminism and everything else going on in our world starts to make a whole lot of sense. Because it is becoming so common, like you're saying, Evan.
Part of that rabbit hole, too, would be I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, there was like an Amazonian Catholic conference or something, and there was like this female goddess who was, like outside the Vatican in Rome, and a lot of traditional Catholics were just totally, upset about it, to put it gently. So if you just Google those words, you can see, because and there was one guy who literally picked it up and he threw it in the Tiber River. It was like some kind of like statuary or some kind of display with this Amazonian god. They're like trying to celebrate Catholicism in in the Amazon. And there were many traditional Catholics who thought it was just totally pagan and this Gaia worship. It's like Mother Earth worship. And I think they were probably right, but That's,
Sure.
I'm not
Interesting.
Catholic, so I don't have a dog in that fight. But anyway.
Okay, but so your Reiki lady that had been teaching you was involved in some of this sweat lodge shamanistic activity, and so you got swept up, and then you went to Joshua Tree, and were there drugs involved or
No.
or any? Okay,
Nope, sober, and just, and it's really interesting because the sweat lodge, there's a sweat lodge at the start, and then they put you out in your spot for 24 hours. No food, no water. You're just on your own. I had a camp pad and a blanket. And other than that, it was just me and the coyotes and rattlesnakes and scorpions. And
you're really selling it, Amber.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm trying to keep people from
like
going.
I already don't like camping, but this is like all the worst parts of camping without any of the good parts. No s'mores, no beers. Okay.
Right.
Wow.
And then
okay,
they
so
bring
it's
you
sweat lodge at
back.
the beginning, and
Mhm.
they what are they doing in the sweat lodge? There's like water being poured over a fire. Like how does that work?
Yeah. So you walk, you crawl in because it's so low, but you crawl in, and make your way around it. There's a circle, and it's very specific. Like we built the entire structure for the sweat lodge, and it has to be like a very specific type of branch, and they have to be aligned specifically to the north, south, east, west, and it's very directional, and then it's a very specific shape within that. And then tons of blankets go over it, so no light is getting in. And then you're on the bare ground, and then there's a pit in the center, and outside is a giant fire that has the rocks, the large stones in it, and those sit in the fire for many hours. So they're just like burning red hot. And then the person who's tending the fire like scoops them in, and the shaman or whoever is leading the group brings them into the center. And when there's enough, then they close up the door, cover up the little door entry. And then you can't really see him. The rocks will glow for a little bit, but then they start pouring water over it. And then it's kind of like most of the oxygen is gone. And then
it sounds like you're at a black site with the CIA or something. Sounds terrible.
Yeah, I've had some really interesting experiences in sweat lodge. I know it's kind of hard because there's a part of me that's like, it's such a big experience, so it sticks out and I've had a lot of extreme experiences like that, and so I guess I don't have quite the same like visceral reaction against it, but I still wouldn't recommend it.
Is the purpose to like sweat out impurities, or is it just suffering for the sake of enlightenment, or
I think it's to sweat out impurities, and then also like there is a level of suffering. This makes me really sad because like Christ did it all on the cross for us, so we don't have to do these things, like we have to obey, we have to repent, we have to believe, we have to obey, but we don't have to like torture ourselves. Right. And so like the man who led this is, has been a friend of mine for a long while, and like he goes through a whole different practice that's it's called Sundance, and it's a small sect of people that does this, but like they actually get pierced through their shoulder blades with a wooden rod, like dowel, and they're hung from like a tree, and they hang there until it breaks through their skin and they fall to the ground. And it's like Christ hung, like there's very specific verses about how like the person hung on a tree is cursed, and like Christ did that for us. So it's just, it's so hard to see people and to know and to come from that of like doing all these really hard things and just struggling and striving so hard towards this goal that is not, it's not the right goal. Like you got the eye on the wrong prize, and it's
so wait, but real quick on the people that are sort of seeking out that kind of suffering, I mean, that picture you just painted it'll turn your stomach. What are they thinking is being accomplished there? Do they think if they endure pain that they're more, I don't know what, rooted in the earth or more enlightened? Like how does pain connect with whatever the goal is? Is the goal enlightenment? Do they think that while they're hanging there, they're going to sort of realize some truths? Like what's the purpose?
I think to an extent there is a level of like purification, back to that like alchemy piece that you were mentioning earlier. I think there is a purification piece, but then I think it's also like this idea of like, this is how sincere my prayers are. And the sadness is like but you're just praying you're praying to gods that aren't God. Like
right.
that's
But
the
they believe they
problem.
are.
But they believe they are.
Yeah.
And
Okay,
so
so it's
there's
like
a
you're
real like
showing them that you're serious
sincerity.
about your prayers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So like I took it like all of that suffering in Joshua Tree to me was just like a testament to how strongly I was dedicated to my prayer while I was out there.
And who were you praying to when you were doing that? What was your pantheon like?
It's interesting because at that time I had done enough work that I could use the term God without being triggered. But of course, my definition of God was my personal sinful human definition of God. And so it was just, the God that like all the things that, I wanted from a God, like me as the creation, making God in my image versus the other way around.
Right.
And so, so I would say God at that time, but it was just this very like loosey-goosey God that didn't have any rules that I didn't like. And
didn't demand anything of you.
Could change at any time given like my changes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So you do the sweat lodge, then you're out for 24 hours, just among the elements with just you and a mat. And then you go back to the sweat lodge.
Another sweat lodge. Yes.
Okay.
And then you come out and then you have a full meal and everything. But that whole time, and I really do feel like this was just God putting this prayer in my heart. Like that whole time that I was out, I was praying for, God, show me the truth and change my heart and my mind. And then like lower level, I had other people I was praying for. And then I was praying for general. This is my mindset. I was praying for Christ consciousness for the world. Like this, like really,
it's very Richard Rohr-esque.
new agey idea of, everybody having the peace of Christ. Which
that's lovely.
That's
a lovely
lovely
intention.
Yes, that is lovely. But it's also like, it's the like, I'll take Christ, but not the Father piece.
Right.
That's just, off course. But so I had this prayer in my heart to have my heart and mind changed. And the last thing I was expecting was to come to Christ out of that. But a couple months later, that's exactly it. Like I started reading my Bible, and a few months after that, I was going to church, and I felt like a complete nut. Like I was like, this is what happened to Doreen Virtue. Like she just lost it all of a sudden, and now it's happening to me. And then, but it was like, I kept feeling like this is where I'm supposed to be. This is where, this is what I'm being called to show up for. And then sure enough, like actual transformation, actual regeneration happened.
Okay. So you're in the sweat lodge and you're praying to your version of what you're calling God. But the real God answered your prayer.
Yes.
And started moving you toward, so the next step was what? You felt compelled to read scripture?
Yeah. Yeah. And well, first, before that, I was super woke. And so all of that fell away. So all that ideology fell away. And so that was the first thing that happened. And then I was desiring to read scripture. And so then I got into the word, but I was still, even then I was using it like a divination tool, like just like popping open the Bible and being like, what do you have for me today?
If I open it to this page, that means that was meant for me. Yeah, I got you. Okay.
Yeah. And then, but it was working on me all the same. So
sure. God will do that, won't he?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
So, and then when you decided to try church, did you just pick something close to you? Like, how did you know you weren't walking into another crazy William Branham kind of business?
Yeah. So I actually, at that time, it lined up with, I was living in California at the time and decided I needed to get out. And so I actually moved all the way across country to North Carolina.
Ooh, North Carolina. All right.
So
I was born in North Carolina. We love it.
Nice. Yeah. So pretty. I didn't make it quite a year there before I moved back home to Phoenix, but that's okay. It was a beautiful detour, and I feel like it was totally intentional that God was like, I'm just going to pop you right into the Bible Belt. Like, just going to immerse you. And so I have family out there. So I started going to their church. And so it was a solid church. And I felt like a total fraud being there because I was like, I don't believe I don't think I believe any of this, but I'm just going to keep showing up.
Yeah.
And then I moved to a neighboring area and had family help me find a church there. And even when I got settled here in Phoenix and got involved in the church I'm at now, I went to the pastors early on and was like, so I'm super good at falling for cults.
Oh,
And can you help me explain, like, can you help make sure that I'm not in a cult? Like, please, like, tell me why that's not what I just walked myself into again.
Right. So honest though, so vulnerable. Okay, now, and I love this part of the story, so I don't really want to detract from it, but was it before or after your, I want to say, conversion, that you were also into yoga? Because you made it pretty far up in the yoga world. And I want to make sure we get that in before we end the episode, because
yeah, I'm so sorry. I
No.
glazed right over that. Yeah, yoga was, I had practiced yoga on and off since like age 16. And so then, actually doing like what's called hot yoga or Bikram yoga was
Bikram
really
yoga. That guy's been sued a million times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, classic guru status. Ends up just being a total like perv. So
Yeah. Who would have seen that coming?
I know it's the first time we've ever seen it. And so that was actually super influential in the process of like going through my divorce. Like that was really like in that hot yoga scene. And then just kept like practicing on and off. And then after I got really into the different energy healing, then I started getting into a practice called Kundalini yoga. And that's literally like working with the serpent energy. Kundalini is considered like this coiled serpent at the base of your spine that you're then moving up and down through the chakras. Once again, back to this idea. And so I went through the whole teacher training, and I was teaching that in the little community I lived in Northern California, and doing all kinds of like hosting monthly healing circles where we got together and did a specific meditation and chant. There was a lot of chanting in that. So you like hold a specific hand posture, and maybe your arms would be up in some weird posture, and then your hands would be held in a specific, what they call a mudra, like you're moving your hands in a specific way, and then you're saying the same chant for like 31 minutes straight or 62 minutes straight.
Those are very specific numbers.
They're very specific. There's a lot of like, this whole world is really superstitious. Like it's really interesting to look at it.
Hindus are like, very superstitious.
Yeah. And so, and that was really, working and practicing out of that yoga studio. The man who owned it actually was the one who introduced me to the realization that the yoga postures, the asanas, are like, they're telling the whole story of the Hindu gods. And I didn't know that. And so this is why I get on about like Christians can't do yoga, because I'm like, you're practicing, you're telling the story of false gods with your body is what you're doing.
And you're also invoking something. It's not just telling the story, right? There's a worship piece happening, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so, and the word yoga, like in the Kundalini yoga world, we would call it, it means union with God, or they'll say it's union with the divine. So it's like, that's what you're showing up for. And if it doesn't talk about God, the Father, like our triune God, then you're worshiping a different God. That's what you're doing. Like you're showing up in worship to other gods. And
so let me get this straight. And I think Kundalini yoga is probably the most, when people in America think about yoga, they're usually thinking about Kundalini yoga, right? Their sun salutation, is that part of the whole thing or no?
No, Kundalini yoga is really fringe. I was just a weirdo. I went for all the really fringy stuff. So no, Kundalini yoga is almost more of an energetic practice. People are more accustomed to hatha or different, there's a lot of different lineages, and they're more accustomed to those things. But there's crossover in all of them. And they're all,
I've gone to yoga classes where they talk about the, they don't call it a serpent, but I've later understood it to be this sort of spiritual serpent kind of thing that's coiled at the base of your spine and it's supposed to sort of work its way up and out right?
Yeah.
And the way that that's happening is you're invoking the powers of these Hindu gods to help it work through the chakras and work its way out. Is that right? I mean, I'm leaving my serpent alone. He's just gonna sleep there until I die. I'm joking. I don't think I have a serpent there, but I remember hearing that in yoga classes I took. They didn't say the serpent thing, but they would talk about the chakras and your spine needs to be aligned, and some of the things about the postures being the ways that we work stuff up through the chakras. So
yeah, I would think that people are saying more what you just said versus I don't know that I've heard people say that you're actually invoking the Hindu gods for that to happen, but I mean, you're definitely like you're telling the story of them, whether you are realizing it or not. So
okay.
That I think is definitely a part of it. But yeah, Kundalini is a really interesting practice, but it's very like some of it. I mean, I knew friends who loved yoga that would show up to Kundalini and they just feel like that was the worst. Like I hated that because, you know, it'd be like sometimes you're just sitting the whole time. Like you're only moving your arms or your hands and you're not like you're not actually moving your body in any specific posture. And then the only side note I'll say, because somebody's gonna get angry about this, is that there are certain ways of moving your body that are very tied to physical therapy and just the way, I mean, like I think of like
stretching.
Yes, I think of like stretching like what would be called a downward facing dog in yoga, and I'm just like, I mean, we see animals do this all the time. Like this is actually just a really natural way, and there's only certain ways that you can move your spine that allow for certain flexion and movement. And so that's not problematic, but I think doing it in that specific series and showing up to a studio where that's the idea and all of the imagery around you is of Hindu gods and things like that. Like then it comes back to like, I don't show up to other people's temples to worship. That's just not what I do.
And there's, you set your intention. And then I think I heard you say this, I might be confusing you with Ray Darabont, but remind me what namaste means. Do you know?
Yeah, it's a saying that says basically like, I'm trying to remember the specific
like the God
word.
in me.
It's worships and sees the God in you.
Yeah.
We
don't know. I mean, the first time I ever went into yoga class, the lady at the end said namaste. And I said, thank you. Because I didn't know what I was supposed to say or what that meant. But now you just think of it as being sort of like peace or salud or something, you know, like blessings on you. But no, it's spiritual.
Yes. I love that story. My sister, the first time she went with a friend to a Catholic mass, and when they turned to her and said, "Peace be with you," she's like, "Thank you so much. It's so sweet." And she's like, "Oh, everybody else is saying, and also with you."
I love it. I love that kind of stuff.
Super cute.
Well, when I will commend the episode. Beckett Cook has an episode with Ray Darabont, where it's all about yoga, and between listening to your story and then hearing that, and I really probably never thought I would hear myself say this, I will not ever do yoga again. And I used to kind of say, yeah, yoga's got some yucky roots, but if you're just going there to stretch, that's fine. But as you said, there are lots of ways to stretch that are not doing the shapes and the sort of dance of it that is yoga. And she talks in that episode about how it was very intentional to sneak Hinduism in through the door of wellness when it came over to the West, namely America, because we love wellness stuff. And so it was like, well, you know, we don't have to tell them that it's these shapes are basically a kind of worship or telling the story of Hindu gods and goddesses. We can just talk about being wellness, and people love wellness. It's really fascinating. And if you don't like what we're saying, you can take that up with Evan, not me. I'm joking. But anything else you want to say about yoga? Just any last thoughts? Because I don't want to speak for you, but
the other thing I'll say is, because you were asking me about namaste, and in Kundalini, we always start and end classes by saying Sat Nam, which means my name is truth. And
wow. Okay, whole other episode there.
The enemy is so like brazen in the way that he does things, but it's just like, well, Jesus is the truth in the way in life. It's like it's so wild to just be like my name, or I am truth.
Right. It's calling yourself divine.
Yeah. And so that was how we always would greet one another. And that's that's like aloha in Hawaii. Like it's just, that's just how you greet one another as you see one another in that world.
Yeah. So fast forwarding back to the end of at least this part of your story, you said that when you started reading your Bible and going to church, first thing that fell away was kind of some woke ideology. I don't want to climb into that. That's another thing for another moment. But would you say like you were already done with Reiki? Were you already done with yoga? Or did you have to kind of come to terms with those things? And how did everything sort of unfold?
Sure. Yoga, I had set down my Kundalini practice because of like a massive earthquake that happened in that whole world, where go figure, it turned out
God will do anything to get your attention.
That the guy who started it was a total fraudster and abuser and all of these other things. I know, we can't believe it. How could a guru go down like that? So that happened in early 2020, and I set down my practice, and it was a big deal. Like it was devastating to me. It was like part of my identity died.
Wow.
And I was actually in the middle of, so speaking of those like specific days, like and times and things like that, they had different levels of commitments. And so I was more than 2 years into a 1,000-day commitment, where I'd been doing the same practice every day for like 2.5 years. And when I found all that out, I was like, I'm done. And I didn't, and it's like in that world, if you have a commitment like that and you miss a day, the next day is day one. Like you start all over again.
Like sobriety. So,
yeah, totally.
Like an AA. Yeah, you get your 1 day chip again.
Yeah. So it was a big deal. So I had already set that down, but no, I was still practicing. I was still practicing Reiki every day. Like I went to sleep every night with my hands on me doing Reiki. And so that had to fall away. And then,
can I ask you a quick question about the sleep thing? Because I've heard people say this whole thing about the right hand and the left hand, one's for receiving, one's for giving. So when you fall asleep, you should I mean, I'm not asking for sleep tips. I recognize this is all stuff we shouldn't be messing with, but would you do this sort of like place your hands in certain ways for rest? Is that part of it, or is that something else?
I don't know if it was, I don't know what the specific meaning was, but yeah, my right hand on my heart and my left hand on my belly.
Okay.
I fall asleep like that, running Reiki energy every single night for years. I can't even, 10 years. I don't know.
Huh.
So yeah.
Okay. Anyway, sorry to interrupt. Keep going.
That's okay. Back to the superstitious.
So you had stopped yoga. It was a little heartbreaking. And then you were still doing Reiki. And then Jesus starts to captivate your heart and what?
Yeah. And then it's like, I feel like it's still cascading, but so that was, let's see. So the Vision Quest was September of 2020. Started reading my Bible December of 2020, started going to church March of 2021. Fall of 2021, I decided that's when I decided to leave North Carolina and come back home to Phoenix, and just like did a sweep and cleared all the books, the feathers, the crystals, the altar items, all the things that I had. And I did a combination, like everything that was of God's creation, like actual natural materials. I walked down to a river in North Carolina and chucked it in the river. And everything else, my certificates, my books, all of the things that was just 10, 15 years of financial, investment and time and all of that, just box after box, chucked it in a dumpster. Oh my gosh. I would have burnt it if I had a safe place to do it. That would have been my preference. But the tarot cards, all the certificates, all the books, and then there's still stuff. Like it's so, the sanctification process is real, and it's awesome, because there are times where I'm just like, oh gosh, this thing has to go. This will never do,
still lingering somewhere in some.
I still find random things that I'm like, oh yeah, that's probably not okay. That's probably got to go.
So when you're, and I don't know how much you do experience this just in your own interactions with people in your life, but if you were to be talking to someone and they just happen to sort of passively say like, oh, well, I had to smudge my house because blah, 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 or, oh, I got this crystal because I've been really anxious, or you just hear little hints of it. Do you pop in and say like, hey, actually, can I tell you my story? Do you like, how do you respond, or how do you think we should respond when that kind of stuff starts to filter in?
Yeah. I find that my approach really varies on like the person and the experience and everything. Sometimes I'm super bold and other times I'm a little less so. I feel like I'm going to share, if it's okay, I'm going to share something that my sister shares because I love it and I feel like it's more it's just a better answer.
Sure.
And she's in a world where she was has a successful online crystal business and still is doing it, but has come to Christ in the meantime. And so she's like navigating, how am I in this world? And she had somebody come in and they were looking for specific crystals for a specific kind of like process, they were healing process they were trying to do. And she just told this story. She's like, just imagine if I built you this amazing home and I, planted all the plants and trees and food that you would need and all of I provided everything for you. And I just said, this is yours. And I gave it to you. And you walked in and you enjoyed all of this. And then you'd have guests over and they would be like, wow, this is amazing. And you'd be like, yeah, I know. Isn't this great? But like never giving the actual gratitude to the creator, like never actually being like, oh yeah, I don't have anything of my own. Like this all comes from the creator. And so, and trying to like give that perspective to people because, and this gets into a whole nother conversation, but the oneism versus twoism, like that whole world.
Explain briefly what you mean when you say that.
Sure. That whole world is oneism. It believes that all is one. And there's no distinction. And so we are all divine. We are all gods. We are all the things versus twoism, which says there's a creation and there's a creator. Yeah. And there's a distinction there. And so, just, I think her way of, I mean, it's a cute story and it's a way of like, just kind of like guiding somebody to this idea of like, you're not the creator, like you're not divine. And I mean, it's a little wonky because, in that story, she's a human creating all this stuff, but it's just a like, it's a start. Way of opening the door. And I love the idea of like, if people have other ways of opening that door, because I still struggle with it sometimes. Yeah. But I do try to find those ways and just pointing like, you know what, all healing comes from Christ. Like we don't have anything apart from that.
Save your money. Grace is free. That's what she should put as a sign on the front door for Crystal. Yeah.
I love it.
Bad for business, but good for true healing.
Yeah.
Well, man, I wish I could ask you so many more questions, but we've been out of time now for a couple of minutes. But this is fantastic. And you were on the show Cultish. So if people want to hear the longer version of this with more detail, they can go listen to that because it was 2 episodes, I think. Right?
That's right.
They broke it down as 2 episodes. Yeah. So but what a story. And I'm so glad that you're on the other side of it now and can be talking to people that are part of that world. That's really cool. So thank you for joining us. Is there any last thing that you're like, oh man, I really wanted to say that and I didn't get to, or just any last words for our audience? You don't have to, but just want to make sure.
I think I'm good. This has just been sweet. Yeah. It's always, there's so much joy and gratitude for where I find myself, and it's not of anything of my doing. And so, it's nice when I get the opportunity to share the story, because I find that people are like encouraged by it. Yeah. I think right now there's so much division. And so people think that people are too far gone, and nobody's ever too far gone for Christ to just grab them, for the Father to hand them. And so I just pray for the people in your life that are still stuck in these deceptive worlds, and just be a light where you can be, because nobody's too far gone. I guess I did have something to say.
I guess you did. There are 2 things you said I'm walking away with. One, I just think it's so cool that you were in the depths of this world, praying your prayer in your way to what you perceive God to be. And God was like, nope, I am going to answer her prayer, but not how she thinks. And he was pursuing you. That's just so cool. And the other thing I love that you said was about how free things are on this side of it. There's no more striving. There's no more hamster on the hamster wheel of always more enlightenment, always more work, self-work to do because now something bad has happened in your life. Like, it's not that life as a Christian is pain-free, but there's a simplicity and a freedom that comes with Christ doing all the work, right?
Sure.
I think that's really cool. So if anyone's interested in learning more about you, I don't know if you want people coming to talk to you, but you do have like a Facebook page or a website or anything that people could come and find you and ask questions. Are you open to that?
I'm completely open to that. I'm kind of the worst right now because I'm barely on social media. I know you had a hard time tracking me down.
But I
But you were
persevered in my
persistent.
stalking. Yes.
Indeed. And I'm so grateful that you were. I am hoping to start a podcast, and the name of it is Walking Softly. So I'm going to start getting out there, and I'm going to start getting on social media and talking about that. And it's about my modesty and femininity journey, and breaking all of the stuff from feminism, coming into this world. And so hopefully that'll come out, and then you can find me there. But otherwise, maybe
until then they can find you through us. Yeah. We'll self-promote. If you really want to ask her a question, I have her number. So you can just find all of our information on the leadership page on HoustonTOT.com, and we'll get that to her. And if you're in the Houston area, we encourage you to come to our events. And for all of our listeners, we encourage you, as always, to question freely, think deeply, and disagree as needed.